Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Emily Lenzner. I'm Senior Vice President of Communications for Atlantic Media. Thank you all for joining us today for our afternoon conversation with Mark Penn. Mark, as I'm sure many of you know, has worn many hats in his career. He served as a pollster and strategist for President Bill Clinton's 1996 re-election and Hillary Clinton's 2008 White House bid. He's worked for Microsoft and consulted for former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Now he runs the Stagwell Group, the private equity firm focused on the marketing services industry. He's here today with my colleague, Steve Clemons, the Atlantic's Washington editor-at-large, to discuss the state of the race, among, I'm sure, many other topics. Steve, Mark, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you. It is a hidden secret, or not so hidden secret at the Atlantic. Emily Lenzner is my work spouse. Nice to be able to connect with you here, so very much. This is going to be fun, and thank you all for joining us today. And I see some old friends from Washington who are enjoying. Ed, you look fantastic. I haven't seen you in years, and yeah, what a great, you look incredible. And I mean, you guys used to run the Department of Commerce, and there are other friends here. And we're going to have a conversation here about politics and policy and strategy. Essentially, Mark Penn, whom Emily just introduced. He's the guy who helped create this entire Clinton phenom until he lost, right? So he did, 96, he did 2000, he did 2006, 2008. You had the longest run, propelling the Clinton franchise than anyone, and then you jumped out of it. But I want to talk to you because you are sort of the Yoda of elections. Yesterday on TV, I was commenting on what an interesting era this is, because when you see what you've done with Bill Clinton and then Hillary Clinton, we see Chelsea Clinton in the wings. The Clinton franchise is in a way supplanting the Kennedy franchise as the family franchise of import in the Democratic circle. So let's talk about the scene. I'm interested right now in if you were going to advise Donald Trump, what would you recommend to him by way of strategy? If you were going to jump ship and be the campaign strategist to the Trump campaign, what would you do that they're not doing?
Drop out. Look, that's always a tricky question when they ask you to give good ideas for your opponents. So you always try to come up with the worst good ideas you can. You don't give them any really good ideas. No, it was fascinating watching his. I was fascinated watching his press conference today. It's because I participated in innumerable presidential and pre-presidential press conference briefings, and it's when they ask you about the Russians, you just say, I had nothing to do with it. That's what you answer.
Yeah,
right. And instead he kind of, but I sold a condo to somebody, and yeah, I made $40 million selling. I've never seen anything, I have to say, I've never seen anything quite like that. And then sure enough, he winds around to a joke that provides a soundbite that then kind of is his message for the rest of the day. So, I suppose an easy one would be to do press conference prep if you're going to do press conferences all the time. But as he says, look, it's worked for me so far. His answer to everything is that it's worked for me so far, right? And his answer in the press conference was, hey, when they say, well, what do you know about politics and policy? And he said, well, I beat 17 politicians. I must know something. And so that's really the point of a disruptive campaign. He is a disruptive campaign, but then it works until it doesn't. And so there's no evidence yet. I mean, the problem was, look, I went through the entire primary season saying he's never getting above 30. Then I said he's never getting above 40. Then I said he's definitely not getting above 50. Right? So then you look at the same pattern repeating itself. Well, he's not getting above 40. Well, he definitely is never getting to 45. Right? When he gets to 45, he's not. I think there's.
But he's been a surprise for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Been a surprise for everyone.
It's hard to find anyone who saw this meteor coming.
Well, let's talk numbers for a minute. Mark sent me a really great chart that I wish I could gift everyone. I'm just going to give you the numbers here, and I think you'll follow them. This chart that Mark has is quite attractive, but it says that there are 321 million Americans. Of those, 226 million are eligible to vote. Of those, 153 million are registered to vote. Of those, 130 million will actually vote in a general election. Of those, 40 million people participate in any primary. And so you only need 20 million on each side in that. And that so you can get a nominee in the race for 10 to 12 million votes. Right. So that sounds to me like you can hijack the system. I mean, it's sort of like a financing. With a little bit of dollars, you can leverage a lot.
Well, oftentimes behind what you see is math, right? There's math to elections. And so I sat down here and said, well, what is the math that is changing elections so that we wind up with someone who is not in the mainstream, right? Knowing that I know this country is 25% liberal, 35% conservative, the rest are moderates. So the two extremes of the planet are in fact not the majority viewpoint by far in terms of this electorate. And how was this season dominated by those kinds of movements? Well, the answer is in the numbers, right? So it takes 10 million people in a primary in order to basically, maybe you get 12 million when it collapses, but once you kind of get to 10 million, you're over the line, out of 320 million people to take a nomination and be one of the two flavors of ice cream that people get to choose from come the general election.
Don't go to the ice cream.
Oh, I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So you have to get,
later.
And what's curious about that is, okay, there are 130 million general election voters. Let's call them 65 million on each side. That means if I can pull in another 2 or 3 million people because I catch on with some more extreme movement and I appeal to more activist types, particularly with the role of caucuses, I can get across the finish line in the primary, even though I'm totally out of sync with what the mainstream of the country is. And that's what Trump was able to do. He has, as he likes to say, he got a record number of Republican votes in the Republican primaries. He brought in an extra 2-3 million people who came to vote for him. Because there are so many people just outside the system, at each level of the system, that it is upending our system. And I'll just take a minute on this. It's hugely complex. I hope to kind of do some better charts on this.
Take 2 minutes.
But, so in the primaries, 10 million takes it. Then you get to the general elections. I grew up in the world of swing voters. 130 million voters. We could just convert a couple of those in the middle, 2 or 3 million, right in the middle will win. And so we spend most of our time going after the other side, reaching out. Okay? And that was the model. And that was the model of Clinton 96. Right? And also when you win going after swing voters, you tend to soar in popularity after you win because you have a governing coalition. You spend all your time trying to appeal to the people who don't support you already. Now, what's happened is there's 100 million people, that difference between the eligible to vote and the people who typically showed up, who are couch potatoes. They're perfectly eligible to vote, they just don't feel like it. And they are very heavily downscale whites, right? And so a candidate now can say, forget those swing voters. I'm just going to pull differential turnout because there's 100 million people outside. If I just pull in 5%, that's 5 million, I win the election. And I think you saw...
So 5 million couch potatoes, and you win the election.
Differential couch potatoes. So if you... And
so
that,
define differential couch potato one more.
That means I go after an ism, right? So if I go after some element of extremism, I'm more likely to motivate some people who don't typically vote. Bush, in his reelection,
so that's a better strategy than going after independents.
It's now an equal strategy. It's now an equal strategy when the campaigns have $1 billion, when the internet makes it possible. So there are two structural changes that kind of switched us: the amount of resources the campaigns have, and the ability to communicate and motivate people one-on-one again, and differentially, because I can micro-target like this half of the audience, but not that half, right? And so I think George Bush pulled out Christian evangelicals in record numbers for his reelection, and Obama, in his reelection, pulled out record numbers of African-American voters, right? And so if you pull some people in, that may be a strategy now, particularly if you've polarized the electorate or a polarizing candidate, where you can win and not be mainstream. And the problem with that is, when you do win, you don't bring the country together, because you've spent your election trying to really stimulate turn out on one end of the spectrum or for some reason or identity of some kind, and not spend all your time trying to bring people over to your viewpoint.
In your 2008 Clinton loss to Obama, did you see that coming?
Well, that was a whole different kettle of fish, because
we got fish, we got ice cream, we got couch potatoes.
Well, that's a primary. So in that primary, you had two campaigns that energized enormous number of voters. Technically, in the primaries, Hillary Clinton won more primary voters and more delegates from primaries. She lost caucuses. And Obama was then able to win then with the excess delegates that he got through the caucuses. And that's totally different. That was a highly energized across the spectrum.
So they weren't really engaged in this either trying to steal voters from each other, or they were both bringing more people in.
No, in that election, Obama was hugely successful at motivating African American voters and the progressive side of the party into a coalition that really hadn't existed before.
So what do you think Robbie Mook and John Podesta are doing now in advising Hillary Clinton today, given what you've just shared with us about the plate tectonics of either bringing new people in, the couch potato, or trying to basically seduce some member of the other side?
I think they're choosing which strategy to do.
They haven't decided?
Well, I think you're going to see pretty clearly in the speech, right, which strategy that Hillary Clinton has chosen. And is she going to spend a lot of time reaching out to the other side, or is she going to double down on the base and really bring out, strong groups of voters from the base?
And what is
now, you can do some of each. You can have a kind of muddied strategy. And no one, in neither strategy would you not fail to bring out your base. But nevertheless, will the campaign have a primary emphasis on bringing out swing voters, as we did in, say, '96, or Barack Obama really had in his 2008 general election, right, where those elections were what I call swing elections, primarily geared towards bringing swing voters in, or is it going to be more of a bring out the base kind of fight? I think clearly Trump is going to try to motivate downscale working class voters just outside the system and try to get 5 million more of those in. And that I think is his only kind of path to a serious first place finish. So I would be surprised if that's the path he didn't follow.
Well, so when you look at it, and I know we haven't seen a lot happen in the election, but do you think that Trump's strategy of chasing that direction could win? Do you think Trump could win?
Well, look, when there are only two candidates, anything can happen. This is the thing about
now you can talk about ice cream.
This is the thing about having nominees. I mean, you get down to two nominees, one of them is going to be president. Hillary's clearly more likely to be president than he, but is his probability zero? Obviously not, right? And so, I kind of liken this race to suppose you had an ice cream store that was like the only flavors that they were offering were kind of blueberry, chocolate, strawberry swirl, and caramel, peanut butter, peanut butter avocado, right? And that's it, right? You don't get the full range of flavors, because now you're going to choose, and so for a long time I think people have said there are no independents because people vote Democrat or Republican. And that's because there are only two flavors in the ice cream store. And the only two things really left in America with only two choices, and you have in Starbucks 155 separate choices typically, the last time I looked at the menu, is really red and white wine and politics.
Wow. The second chart that Mark Penn sent to me was interesting. He broke up, he said there are 4 types of voters today. Those that want both Hillary and Trump are 0. Those that want Hillary but not Trump are basically 40% of the crowd. Those that want Trump but not Hillary, never Hillary, are 40%. And then the neither Hillary or Trump, the 20%. So you are down to the 20% that has to choose between the two ice creams, right?
Well,
so I guess my question is...
And don't like either flavor.
Yeah, and don't like it. So this seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but when I went back to sort of look at the 1996 race, and people, when Bill Clinton won, he barely won. I mean, you had a lot of other factors come in. He won 50% of the electorate. He also had trust issues. And so that trust, and you got him to victory, right? So
I don't know. I did. He did.
Well, I want to give you a little credit,
Well.
but Hillary's facing a case where 67% of the public think she's got trust issues. Again, you've got a kind of interesting dynamic. How do you fix this, given how you've described the scene? What do you do? And is it similar to '96?
No, it's not at all like '96.
I will distance
See,
myself
this
with
is
that.
the peculiar math of this. So then I take a look. What's your model? Again, if you have to have a structural model to really have a strategy. So what's the stark, undeniable, rather unpleasant fact about this election as it stands today? Exactly as he said, zero. I think there are 4 types of voters. Type 1, people who like Hillary and Trump. That is effectively 0, right? Okay. I mean, there may be a few, but effectively 0. That's very unusual. Usually, that's 10%, 15%. People who like Trump, not Hillary, 40%. People like Hillary, not Trump, 40%. People who don't like either, 20%. Now I'm rounding. Somebody will take a poll and they'll find it 17 or whatever. But basically, that's the structure of this race. That means the people around 50% are people who don't like either candidate. So that means the kind of what you see, which is the negative that the candidates are throwing at each other, not likely to have much impact. The deciding voters already don't like both. So how are you going to make them? I really hate that candidate, right? So then you have to have theories, given that's the math of how you're going to win. So theory 1 is, if they just hate him or her more than they hate me, they will vote for me. That's a very risky theory, right? Then theory 2 is, I'm going to convert people who don't like me to people who like me. That has huge gains. And Hillary's convention speech, as Trump's convention speech was, is the greatest potential opportunity for doing that, which is why the most important thing in this convention is how her positive image, if it changes at all, that's gold in the bank. The third theory would be, ultimately those voters don't like either candidate. They are not going to vote on the basis of the candidates because they don't like them. They're going to vote on some other basis. Change, continuation. We need to have a more progressive viewpoint. We need a more conservative viewpoint, right? There's got to be a central defining question aside from the candidates' personalities and qualifications for those voters. And that's how they're going to vote. I think we're going to see how much mileage on the positive side Hillary can get out of her speech. She has a lot of room to go up. Her numbers are at her all-time low today. So she might get out of theory 2. I think theory 1, the one I hate more is a very tenuous theory. And I think theory 2 and 3 are the more likely strategic areas. So that means how you frame this election, what it's about, is now as important as who the candidates are and what their experience is.
So much of the churn politically in both parties right now seems to be a cynicism and resentment of Washington, what it represents, what people see as structural corruption, as irrelevant to their lives. And you saw a lot of that in Bernie Sanders' race. You certainly see a lot of it in Trump. How does Hillary Clinton deal with that when many of my relatives in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas see her as this monarch, this queen, returning back to her castle in Washington? I mean, it doesn't matter what I show them about Donald Trump and what he said. They just see him as a wrecking ball, and they love that. And they see her as the queen of convention. How do you shake that if you were running things?
But I think that's what President Clinton was working at last night, calling her a change maker, right? Something we are the change makers, something that was very popular in Britain a number of years ago. But this notion of change maker was an attempt to say, look, she has the strength and experience to make change happen, and all her life, whenever she's gone somewhere, she actually did get things done. So what does change mean, right? Does change mean shutting down Washington and more rights to the states, or is there or states mean that you're going to take the situation that you see where Congress and the president are not hammering out legislation that makes common sense, and finding those grounds of commonality? And do you think Hillary has the strength of leadership to really pull that off in a way that we haven't seen since the late 1990s? I think she has a good argument for that case, but she can't say, I'm the Washington outsider. That would get laughed at. But she can say, I'm going to come in here and really make change happen. And that's where she's going to have to stake her case.
Do you think Tim Kaine helps that or not?
Look, I think Tim Kaine was an excellent choice.
How does Tim Kaine help the math?
Well, look, Tim Kaine helps potentially in Virginia. It helps because he's a competent, highly well-regarded, guy with tremendous experience, and he adds to the ticket, and he can work with her, not against her. And I think, he had, I think, a lot of attractive elements, but this, the recent history is that risky vice presidential choices have been just that, risky, right? And that they've done more damage than harm. So if you didn't, I don't think there's any evidence that choosing Kaine was a negative for Hillary, and therefore I think he was a positive. And plus he is a good, he's experienced, he's got, he will work well with her. He'll be the kind of vice president who could be a partner. He won't be antagonistic in any way, because also setting up a friction between the president and the vice president, that can be hugely destructive. Remember, as I always say, getting elected, no matter how difficult getting elected is, 2/3 of those who get elected fail to govern well. Governing is even harder than getting elected, right? And so setting yourself up right, getting a broad coalition of support, reaching out and bringing people together, having a team that is really a team as president and vice president, those are hugely important to governing.
I'm interested in how you, Mark, as you think about the math of elections, and look at demographic change and within the prism of both parties. Ron Brownstein talks about this all the time, saying it is everything right now, but you don't see the same attentiveness to that. You see sort of handouts or whatnot in Cleveland, but here, how do you see both parties approaching the demographic shifts going on in the country?
Well, it's interesting to see what are there are a couple of big shifts that people don't talk about. I think people talk all the time about the diversity and the growth of diversity, and I'll talk about that. But the first, to me, let me bring in another analogy. Let me mix things up further. But think of life as an accordion. Okay.
Didn't see that one coming.
Right, didn't see that one coming. Now just stretch the accordion out. Okay, and that's what's happened. Okay, and when I say that, what's happened is people who are 65 are now the largest demographic group that they've ever been. This is the oldest that the country has ever had. And when John F. Kennedy was elected, people, whatever it is, 18 to 29, outnumbered over 65 2-1. Today it's 1-1. It's crossing the line. This could be the first election where the over 65 is greater in size than that group. But there's also accordion squeezing changing at the other end. That's what I call being footloose and fancy-free. The average age of marriage, right, keeps moving back, and particularly with more and more people going to college. College is up to like 68% will go to some college. And so you've seen almost a 10-year push out, and in the last decade or so, another 4 years. So that huge numbers of people, probably approaching the majority, will now have 10 years of what I call footloose and fancy-free. So footloose and fancy-free is, studio apartments or roommates, lots of food ordering, Ubers, no car, no kids, not much responsibility, not as much need for income, a completely different lifestyle. And people never had that extra 5 years. So now when you have 10 years like that, and a lot of people don't get religion until they have a child and so forth, and so that's a 10 full year, and that also fuels different political movements. I think that fuels a lot of the impact of Bernie Sanders and a lot of the energy and enthusiasm among youth, simply because youth not only has another 5 years. And so not only is there another 10 years at the end of life, but there's another 5 years of youth. And so, the soccer moms and things that I targeted are actually diminishing, right, in nature. And so who's rising? Rising are footloose and fancy-free. Rising are seniors over 65. And, demographic change, in 1992, 2% of the electorate was Latino, astoundingly, too. And by 96, it had already moved up to 4 or so. And so I think, that's kind of the biggest shift now. African Americans are up to 13, a little bit over 13, but not a huge amount of change. The biggest change was in their registration and voting, because they used to be around 10, right? And birth rates are falling. We're not making a lot of people. So immigration is going to become a more and more important topic as we're not at zero population growth, but we're getting very close to it.
In '96, one of the big frames that you brought was the economy stoop, and I'm going to go to all of you after this. But I'm just saying, if you were to concoct a frame that you thought really mattered right now, and that had that, what do you think the zinger, the killer app zinger would be?
Yes, well, I have to attribute that to Carville. I can't steal that one, but
you sold it.
I stole more the creation that women entering the workforce were becoming a more powerful force, so that downscale manufacturing men who weren't college educated, which was the primary target of the Democratic Party, was too limiting because they weren't making any more of those. And what they were bringing was huge numbers of women were coming to the workforce, beginning to have children, beginning to face a whole new set of problems. And I think that the party...
Well, now Hillary coming to head the party, really, that's a big validation of that line.
That's right. Yeah. It's a tremendous... It was a whole new... But that also changed government policy, right? We talk about drug-free schools. We talked about a whole new set of things. I think what's interesting to me is that we're still caught in the discussion of manufacturing jobs as the primary thing that they talk about in politics, right? And yet what there has been for the last 3 decades is an enormous growth in the service industry, the technology industry, the new economy. And President Clinton in '96 was always talking about how we're going to have a new economy based on the global economy and how people were going to have new jobs. And there's just so surprisingly little dialogue about the fundamental change that most people are facing, I think, with a huge focus on the manufacturing sector, when it's the service sector that's been exploding, that has new problems, new opportunities, and the fact that our population has moved from well, if you look at the voters, almost just 1/3 going to college to over 2/3, and so we've had a huge surge in both education. And we've also had a tremendous growth in the upper middle class. There are a lot of studies that say that the middle class is shrinking, but if you read the fine print, 3/4 of the people leaving the middle class went to the upper middle class, right? They got a college education, they have a better job. And so it's always puzzling to me, and a lot of this has to do with the Electoral College centering in the Rust Belt, how little talk there is about the new economy and what the needs are to have an innovation-based economy.
On the subject of women, real quickly, I think the nation was startled in a positive way listening to Michelle Obama talk about what this moment could mean for her daughters and herself, and sort of seeing this. It was really a remarkable moment, I think, and it is along the line of the track that you're saying here. And even in the Atlantic, I think some of our best-selling issues that we've ever had have been the ones that have sort of been looking at, can women still have it all? Yes, they can. No, they can't. There's a whole variety of issues around this. But there was a split in the parties who came through. We had a lot of young millennial women who identified with what Bernie Sanders was saying. Do you think that if that is a rift, that can be brought to sort of supercharge Hillary's campaign, and that's where they're going? Or do they downplay a lot of those questions?
Look, I think we used to call it FWP, First Woman President, is a huge element here. It's undeniably a huge element. And I think that it can't be overplayed nor underplayed. It is. That is part of what she represents, but that doesn't mean that anyone should vote for someone who they don't think would be the best president. You want to be both the first woman president and the best candidate and the best person for president, and I don't think there's really a split between those things. I never did. I think that it is, if you look, those factors that were in the primary are totally different in the general election. In the general election, she has huge support among younger women, and it's older women who actually are more of a problem. So it's all these people who voted for Kennedy who are now greatest generation voters. But surprisingly, the whole dynamic of this completely changed. And don't forget about parents. Parents look at their kids, and half those kids are daughters, and they think it's really important for their daughters to feel just like their boys and say, hey, any one of you could be president in this household. I think that is powerful, and it appeals not only to the younger generation coming up, but to the parents of this younger generation who are really focused on how well or poorly their kids are going to do and what opportunity they have to succeed.
That's great. Thank you. Let's do some lightning round questions and comments. We got a cool crowd here. Ed, right here. They're never going to give you the mic.
Okay, great.
They're just worried about what you're campaigning for, all the agitation you're doing in the streets here in Philadelphia.
That's it. I'm getting right on it. So my question ultimately is, how important is it to fight back when people throw mud at you? Do you have to answer? And I think back to 2004 and John Kerry, when they were going after him for what he thought was his strongest attribute, having been
Swift boating.
Yeah. And he said at the time, the American people are too smart to fall for that. And so
mud or high road, low road?
First of all, it's very interesting. Presidential races now, 90% of the advertisements are negative, right? That's why I'm saying this is if somebody looks at the numbers here, this election might be a little, but usually you have people who might be positively perceived, or the people that don't know, and they spend the entire time throwing mud at each other. Kerry's exactly in that situation. Well, they might like him if we let him get him out of the box. And Romney, I think, was very effectively characterized before he got out of the box. So pretty much the name of the game has been to go ahead and do that. And therefore, you're defending against that and not being characterized or pigeonholed the way either Kerry or Romney, I think was job number one for any campaign. And you look at both of these campaigns, and they both had problems early on that really set their tone. I mean, Trump had the Muslim ban that he sort of a little bit walked back that really kind of characterized him. And Hillary had the emails and how she responded to that characterized him. And could both of them, responded better and had an outcome somewhat better than that? Probably. But so that's your maximum always was never let any charge go unresponded. Part of what you have to realize, and I always explain this, that America is a rough and tumble country. I always say that.
But we don't like to think of ourselves that way.
No, we don't like to think of ourselves, but the number one show for years was a Survivor where you throw people off an island. Donald Trump, after all, had a show where you fired people all the time. And as I always point out, though, even those cute little birds are angry birds, right? And so it's really been a rough and tumble country for a while, and social media accentuated the extent to which.
I know when I bring on new friends on Facebook, I kick people off the island. I mean, I have to get rid of some every time I take someone new. It is a Darwinian world, right?
So you want to always respond. Both of these campaigns now have such high negatives. This is the ultimate conclusion of 90% negative campaigns, is that no one likes anything or anybody, and that's part of the problem that we have in America right now. It's gone a little too far.
Wow. Yes, right here. Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth Harrington. I'm with the Free Beacon. I was wondering, when's the last time you've spoken to the Clintons, and are you advising the campaign at all? And also, more generally, what are your thoughts on both Bill and Hillary's performance on the campaign trail so far?
Thank you.
Oh, great. I never answer the first question when I've spoken to one of the Clintons at any time. 2, I'm not advising the campaign. And 3, she won. The old politics is a winner-take-all game. And try as we did in 2008, we just came this close. And people can always say, well, Bernie shouldn't have gotten us high, et cetera. But the truth of the matter is, there's always an opponent in the Democratic primary. You always have one. The progressive wing can always be a strong opponent, and she won. And she is the first woman president. So politics is measured by the results, and by the results, she's.
Well, let me ask you, jump on your question, because I think it's interesting, but I have other friends that write for the Free Beacon, and one of the questions is if you'd had an incident like in Nice, or you had another set of things like at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, you had terrorism that began to change, the ecosystem about fear in this country. Do you think that the way Donald Trump has organized his response to that beats how Hillary Clinton? Because a lot of people criticize Hillary Clinton as being, too ready to push the military button. But how does terrorism sort of change the political ecosystem?
Well, that's why I think the hour that she's going to have with the American public is very important, as reestablishing her as the 3 a.m. candidate you would want at 3 a.m. I think that Donald Trump is running as a 3 a.m. candidate, but is he really the person who's qualified to pick up the phone? He hasn't really proven that, and so that's going to be certainly a significant issue. There's no question. There's no question that that's a fight back and forth. In the polls, on some of this stuff, Trump is actually ahead of her now. But I think she can provide the confidence, that as reflected in the 3 a.m. ad that she had in 2008, which is that you need a steady, certain, and sure hand when trouble happens.
Interesting. Yes, hi. How are you?
Well, thanks. How are you? Sorry, thank you.
They'll never give you that mic. I don't know.
Sorry, I'm trying to wrestle it from you.
We're so afraid of,
Sorry.
I'm just joking.
So thank you so much for a fascinating discussion. My name is Ruth Sherlock, and I work with the Daily Telegraph. I just had a quick question about numbers. I think you mentioned that there are 100 couch potatoes, registered voters who will not vote. I wondered what the breakdown of those voters was in terms of kind of African-American, white.
Well, there are 100 million people who are not likely to vote, but are
vote.
eligible to vote.
Right.
They're not all registered. A lot of them are unregistered. And you'd say, well, who's left? Well, a lot of the people who college degrees are over-registered and already in the pools. You'd say they're probably about proportionally to the population of African American. There are probably still more Hispanics to get off the couch, because there's a lot more Hispanics in the country than have voted, even though they've been the fastest growing group over the last few years. And then there are a lot of downscale whites in that group, more proportionally downscale whites than not.
Say it again.
Donald Trump might be in with a chance then. Donald Trump.
Well, again, it's not that easy to motivate people to get off the couch. And so, you look at it, about 130 million people have voted in the general election the last few times here. And so will we see some change?
Is there some kind of selective attention, or I guess cognitive dissonance or something going on among Democrats? I mean, Donald Trump in many polls is ahead of Hillary Clinton right now. As I read in the CNN poll, it was 9 points ahead. There was a poll showing in a four-way race where you got Gary Johnson. He was still 3 points ahead of Hillary, which was very interesting. And as I have said through this thing, I have about 100 cousins in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, and about 97 of them are very, very pro-Donald Trump. And I'm not kidding. I mean, they really are. There are about 3 or 4 that were for Hillary Clinton, because they see her as a conventional candidate, as the queen of the Democratic Party, returning to Washington, D.C. to keep everything together. And they feel they've been screwed by that. That's what they see as corruption. So I guess, you walk around, this room, and people just don't see any way Donald Trump could win. They've convinced themselves they can't. But he could.
Well, but I'm with.
A lot of people think
I'm
he
with
will.
that group. I didn't see him winning before.
Yeah.
If you really push me, I don't see him winning now. But
But you see him winning more now than you saw him 6 months ago.
It's like could a guy who can't finish his sentences and uses the word huge all the time possibly become president of the United States in the 21st century? It's a preposterous question. And most voters, when you ask them who's going to win, they all say Hillary's going to win. But what you point out is that the horse race is basically tied. And what I come out to you and say, look, that you notice that it's tied in the low 40s, right? And that's because there's this huge number of I don't like both, I can't decide. And ultimately, how is she going to frame the election so that she can unlock those voters, right, in the end? Or will he come and frame this election as about, it's time we really had, he's going to go for big radical change that he represents, and he's told you his issues. He said it's about immigration, it's about ISIS, it's about law and order. He's defined the candidacy, based on bringing people, some of these couch potatoes, off. You know exactly what his strategy is. On the other hand, we're just seeing what Hillary's strategy is to come out of these low numbers, to bring the country together, to bridge over into that 20% that doesn't like either. We'll say that she's more likely to be the candidate to turn to in difficult times and more likely to bring the country together. And if she can succeed in that, that's why this goes from Hillary in a landslide. So when you look at all the probabilities, Hillary in a landslide, because she gets all the votes that Bernie would get in a trial horse race, to Trump by 1 point. Nobody believes Trump could win by, right? And Trump, to do that, would have to take Pennsylvania and a bunch of Rust Belt states to make up for a lot of the other states that he can't win. So it's a significantly lower probability, but a lot of it we'll see the polls going into Labor Day. People rarely overturn the Labor Day result. Will she get a bump that wipes him out? I think this convention so far is going pretty well, right? And so she should get a counter bump that puts her back ahead, by 4 or 5 points at the end of this convention come next week. If that doesn't happen, then people are going to be waiting for the first debate. The fascinating thing is that these mass events, in the era of the internet and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, it is the mass events that are having enormous impact here, whether it's the conventions or the debates. And TV and how it communicates is probably more important rather than less important.
We got to wrap this up. But if you were to give an honest assessment of Hillary Clinton's campaign strategists, and you know everybody in this game on both sides, what do you think their big blind spots are?
Well, look, I think her team is first rate. I don't think that, what I've said to you before is they're going to choose a strategy, and that strategy is going to be either based primarily on getting the base or primarily on bringing voters over. And to me, that's the critical choice that I want to see. And if you don't see the choice, that will be a problem, right? Because that means they never really chose those strategies. But I think the important thing to see now is there going to be a clarity of that strategy coming out? Which direction will it go? You can win either way, but you have to carry either strategy out to the max. Either bring the country together through swing voters and pull over 5 million swing voters, win in a landslide, right? Or double down on the base, block Donald Trump, go close, but ultimately win because of the turnout. I think they're both good strategies. What we're looking to see is which one they choose.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to think that the next time you have ice cream, you will think of it differently. And if you're in a room with an accordion, you'll give it sort of a little bit more oomph, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Penn, President and CEO of the Stagwell Group. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.